Welcome to Community Conversations. My name is Hally Ammons and I am your host. As Assistant Director for Government and Community Relations at Villanova University, I am delighted to bring you the extraordinary people making an impact on our campus community and beyond. Today, I will be speaking with Scheiner and John Delaney from our Dean of Students office at Villanova. Sydney is the Assistant Dean Assistant Dean of Students for Conduct Resolution, and John is our Conduct Resolution Specialist. Thank you so much and welcome.
Thanks for having us.
Of course, my pleasure. Not everyone is familiar with higher ed and the way that universities are structured. So, Sid, could you tell us a little bit more about the Dean of Students office, what it is, where it fits in a campus community?
Sure. So, no, you bring up a great point that a lot of people are unfamiliar, and especially in a college setting, I feel like you hear the word dean thrown out a lot. There are academic deans, and where John and I work on campus is the Dean of Students office housed in the Division of Student Life. Our jobs have very little to do with academics and have a lot more to do with supporting students as they embark on their, and sustain their journey at Villanova outside of the classroom. So, as we know, students come to our campus, yes, primarily for, educational purposes, but it's a very holistic experience, especially at Villanova. We really value not only a student's, academic success, but their personal growth, their overall development and well-being. We talk a lot about students' mental health and supporting them, along their way. And as we know, things can come up along a student's journey at Villanova that are challenging. And we really think of the Dean of Students office as kind of a hub for student support and student, we remain accessible to students to help them work through some of those challenges that might come up along the way. So some of those things, that I'm sure we'll talk about today might involve students making decisions that maybe aren't the best or the safest or most responsible decisions, and what that might look like, and how we work through that to help them address that and make sure that our community is intact. Personal things come up along the way. A student might have something happen at home that impacts their academics or impact their academic progress or have a chance to, and we like to support students along the way there. We have another person in our office whose job primarily focuses on student support and well-being. So we really are a pretty well-rounded office, but I really like to kind of classify it as a hub for student support.
That's amazing. And I think it's, addresses so many needs of a modern campus, a modern student body. It's not just a disciplinary body. This is a, sort of a wraparound function for, a whole student. So I'm going to stay with you and I'll move to John. Can you tell us a little bit about how long you've been at the university, your current position, and John, I'll move to you after that.
Sure. So I've been at Villanova. This will be my 6th academic year. So I just rounded up my 5 years in July of 2023. So I started at Villanova in July of 2018. So just before the start of that academic year, I started in a role very similar to John's. So I've actually been with the Dean of Students office for my entire time at Villanova. I started off, I've always been hearing conduct cases and meeting with students for primarily those purposes, but again, also serving in those roles of student support and have kind of found myself involved in the university in different ways. I've facilitated courses over the years. I'm an instructor now for a first-year leadership course. So I've tried to kind of tap myself into different facets of the university. In October of 2022, so a year ago, just surpassed the 1 year in this current role as Assistant Dean of Students for Conduct Resolution. And primarily what my role really does focus on is the student conduct process, or we like to call it the conduct resolution process, because that's really the goal, is we're working toward resolutions of issues that come up for students and therefore come up for the community. So really kind of serving in that role to kind of, both meeting with students, but also kind of in that higher level, what do we want that process to look like at Villanova? Are we being super disciplinary and punitive, or do we want to be a little bit more restorative and educational and developmental, which that is definitely the direction that we take that we'll, I'm sure talk a little bit more about, but really serving in kind of that role. And we have to really maintain a lot of campus partnerships. So for example, with your office, with the Department for Public Safety, with student involvement, with residence life. So it's a lot of kind of having a sense of what a lot of other, parts of the university are doing too.
Oh yeah. I feel like I couldn't do my job, certainly without your team, with really any other office on campus, where I'm certainly very dependent on those partnerships. So it's great to sort of see how it works in another department. And yes, I definitely want to touch on what that conduct process looks like. But first, John, I want to have you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more about you and how long you've been with the university.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm John Delaney. I'm the Conduct Resolution Specialist for the Dean of Students Office. I've been in the role since February 2023, so I'm going on 7 months, something like that. And really what I help do is kind of help Sid in terms of the conduct review process at the university. So I meet a lot of students for student conduct cases. I also am the primary conduct review administrator for off-campus students. So a lot of my work deals with students that are living out in the surrounding boroughs or surrounding townships when they potentially have trouble with either their neighbors or police or things like that. I'm usually the person that does the follow-up with those students. I do some other stuff for the university. I do some programming for other campus partners like student involvement, things like that. And then I also will do some off-campus event planning with you and with Sid for the surrounding communities.
And we can talk about that too in a few minutes. That's I think it's really illuminating, specifically for folks who are watching, who may not have a full understanding of how we work with our off-campus students as well. Our off-campus students are still students; they're still a part of the Villanova community, and certainly your work in engaging with those students is super important in reinforcing that. So I want to talk a little bit more about what the conduct resolution process looks like. We talked about it being resolution. Sid, I don't know if you want to talk about a little bit more what that means, what it looks like if a student is coming into your office to receive that kind of intervention.
Yeah, so things, as we know, things happen. It's college, students are learning, they're young, they're making mistakes, we expect that. So if a student is in a situation or they make a decision that is a violation of our code of student conduct, right? So students coming to Villanova, they agree to, adhere to the expectations of the code of student conduct, which has things in there like, obviously drinking under the age of 21. We have a drug policy, we have a vandalism policy. Things like that. It very much mirrors, local and, federal law, but there are also some policies too that might not be. So for example, on Villanova's campus, even if you're over the age of 21, you can't have hard liquor on campus. So we know that hard liquor often leads to pretty unsafe situations, or if a student has consumed hard liquor, it's more likely that they're in an unsafe situation. So that's an example of a policy that is a little bit different at Villanova. So when we get notified of something that happens, and it's usually from, residence life on campus or public safety, or something has happened in the local township that involves a Villanova student, John and I are made aware of that. We receive a report of some kind, and we basically review it and learn about what happened. And if a student or students are listed in that report, the first thing that we do is we reach out to that student. And we're very candid with them. We say, we've been made aware of something that happened, about, on or around this date, you may have violated this policy. So 9 times out of 10, a student coming into our office knows what we're talking about, and they're kind of prepared to talk through that. So we really share with that student, what we know. Here's our sense of the situation. Can you share with us your perspective? We want to incorporate that. We want to hear from you. We don't just want to make a decision based on something that we read. We want to hear how you think about it and you feel about it and what happened. And sometimes we really do learn things that change the situation. And oftentimes, the student comes into our office and really takes a lot of ownership over what happened. And I think that's what I want people to know is at Villanova especially, we see a really high rate of students who do accept responsibility for what happened and acknowledge that they might have been in the wrong to some degree. And so we really talk with them about, maybe why they made the decision that they did. How do they feel about that? What do they think they need to do to, do something differently next time? Does that involve does that involve safer drinking? Does that involve, thinking maybe 2 or 3 more times about making that decision that you did? So we really try to have that moment of education with the student and say, well, how can we avoid this again in the future? So, understandably, students are very nervous coming into our office because it never feels good to get in trouble or to get caught doing something that you shouldn't have been doing. But I think that John and I really try to take the approach of, we're here to, yes, hold you accountable to the expectations, but we're also human and we understand that mistakes happen, and there's a lot of learning that can happen, and I think students walk out actually feeling a lot better sometimes, feeling like, oh, that wasn't actually as bad as I thought it was going to be, and they really heard me, and a lot of times students just kind of want an opportunity to be heard, and so we try to work toward a resolution that gets to not only that accountability piece, but also what is something we can put in place that's actually likely to reduce the chance of this happening again.
Right. John, I wanted to know if you have anything to add to that, since you are also working with our off-campus student population. Does that change anything, or is it impact your approach in any way?
Well, it does. So when you have a report for students that we follow up on, really there's kind of snapshots at a student's experience at Villanova. And when you have the opportunity to meet with them, you kind of try to expand that snapshot and kind of understand what is their current reality or what's their current experience. And are there any stresses or pressures from an aspect of their experience that we can kind of alleviate or work through or talk through for some preventative strategies, so that recidivism, or just they reduce their chances of having a similar situation happen again. So when I talk to off-campus students, I talk to them about living in residential communities, what are their relationships with their neighbors like, and how to improve those relationships, and what are they doing, moving forward to kind of make sure that people aren't feeling like they need to either call the police or have to interact with you in a negative light again.
Right. I think this is a good segue into talking about off-campus engagement with our off-campus students. It looks a little different on campus. The students who live on campus are already here. They're on campus all the time. They're getting messaging from a lot of different entities on campus. But our off-campus students are, by nature, slightly more detached, even though they still are part of Villanova community. So one of the things that we work on together is our off-campus outreach to those students. I wanted to talk a little bit about how that has evolved this semester. Typically, I will go out with our local law enforcement, with Radnor and Lower Merion, and go door to door and speak to our off-campus students and reinforce our good neighbor messaging. But I also want to talk a little bit about how we did that from a Villanova perspective with our Villanova students. And John, if you could elaborate a little bit on what that looked like, the walk and talks with our students, and the kind of messaging that off-campus students are hearing.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've done 2 events. We did the walk and talks, where you and a couple members from our Student Government Association and myself walked around the local boroughs and townships and kind of interacted with students in their own environments off campus. And we kind of gave them some advice, some educational materials, and then, future events that we'll be doing, and that happened in Lower Merion. We also did a community cookout event where we took over a parking lot next to some local businesses, and we invited some food catering and the local neighbors and students, which I think got a lot of success this year, and we're trying to expand that as years go on. And really, this is just an effort so that our students are living in the borough. There's things that they need to learn about living in a borough, and how do we support them in that off-campus living experience, and also make sure that their neighbors and their communities are feeling connected to the university as well.
Absolutely. That particular event had a pretty good turnout, and it was, for me, a great way for our off-campus students to meet and just be at the same place with their neighbors in a relaxed environment. It's not the middle of the night, it's the afternoon, everyone's getting to see each other, get to know one another, and without the support of the Dean of Students Office, obviously it couldn't have happened. So we're definitely looking forward to continuing that. We do some other events in the spring similar to that event in Radnor Township. So it's that proactive messaging. A lot of the work is necessarily reactive, but I think trying to be proactive as much as possible. Sid, do you want to add anything to those outreach events?
Yeah, I think you really were super comprehensive, and just that, like, we view our job as proactive as well. So obviously, primarily, John and I are on the reactive side. Something has already happened, but we very much view our job as well as much as we can to be on that proactive side. So, all these things are happening, off campus, and we try to mirror that on campus as well. But talking with students about, what are the main concerns that we see, for example, out in the township, like what are some common mistakes that we've seen? So we want to tell students about those so that they can avoid it, right? So that doesn't end up as an issue for them, and more importantly for the community that is harmed as a result of when students leave. If they leave something on the ground, or they might take a drink outside of their house when they shouldn't have. And so we try to educate students on open container laws and litter laws and things like that. So, and students we find are really receptive to that, and they really do want to be positively contributing members of the community. And I think that's something that, I want to, make sure people are aware of is, I think for the most part, we really have excellent students who are really cognizant of these things and want to do well. And, they're learning. And so we try to help them kind of learn along the way.
Yeah, and this is the first time they're potentially living in a residential community by themselves or with just their friends where they're the main caretakers of where they live. So, we find that, that proactive messaging is important because a lot of times they're not even aware of potential issues that they could be running into. And the more we can educate them, our hope is we're reducing the amount of problems they're running into when they're living off campus.
Right, absolutely. And of course the communities around our campus they're dense, they're like little cities, so people really do, it's good to reinforce that good neighbor messaging that you're living, your community is diverse. It's not just students. And I think you're right. I think it's one of my favorite parts of the job is to interact with our off-campus students and just get to know them a little bit. So I think I'm really looking forward to expanding on these efforts. John, what are you looking forward to as you enter your next year at Villanova? What are some of the things that you're really looking forward to?
Yeah, I think getting to first off see all the programs that we do is going to be a lot of fun, but also how can we improve them and expand them and become a bigger resource for off-campus students to make sure they have the connection to Villanova, because they live in a variety of areas just outside of Lower Merion. They live at Radnor, Tredyffrin. They live considerable amount of distances. So making sure that they know that Villanova is always connected with them as they're a student and their experience, and taking what the programs we do now and kind of just seeing how can we improve or make better or make bigger, just so that we have a bigger impact with just our students and then also our communities that we're connected to.
Absolutely. Sid, I'll let you have the last word on that. What are you looking forward to now? You've been a full year in your current role. Congratulations.
Yeah, thanks. And I think having that year to kind of get the lay of the land, and but I also have the advantage of having context of Villanova, having been here for several years prior. But I think just continuing to help students see us in our role, because as the people who are kind of involved in the conduct resolution process, understandably students can want to avoid us, but we find that the more that we do things like this and make sure that students and community members know who we are, how can we be more proactive in that programming, in that education, so that when students are in that position where they might have to come talk to us about something, that wall comes down a little bit more and they're more likely to be more honest and more forthcoming when they realize, hey, I've seen that person before on campus, they're not just the scary person behind a desk. And when students are more honest with us, then we can actually get to the roots of some of the problems. And so just looking forward to kind of putting ourselves out in the community more.
Well, I want to say thank you so much. And John and Sid, you work with me so much and you're so generous with your time, not just in this area, but also at our neighbors meetings. So I always really appreciate all that you do for our students and for the community. For more information on all of the great things happening at Villanova and for ways to get involved, please visit www.villanova.edu/neighbors.